You are now relearning economics.
Welcome back to another reaction video of the worst economic takes online live. We're going to be talking about the $37 trillion in federal debt in the US today, and we're going to be reacting to a video from a Canadian broadcaster on this very topic. It's going to be fun, to say the least. How are you guys doing? You know what I want to do to start this live stream is I want to show some appreciation to my Patreon members. Now, eventually I'm going to have some graphics. You know how some channels, they got their Patreon subscribers. I didn't make that. Okay, I got a lot of work to do. I didn't make that today, but I'm going to read off, the first page. So the first 50 subscribers. Just to show some appreciation. Maybe every couple shows I'll do that. Make sure I mix in all the names out there, but let's go through them. Antonio Soy Castles, basic supporter. Joe Foran, an intermediate supporter. Jonas K, just had a meeting with Jonas K. He's a pro supporter. George Whitlam, pardon me, basic supporter. Econ, no name, but Econ, pro supporter. Christopher Edwards Bailey, pro supporter. Stephanie Coop, how you doing? I know you watch a lot. Pro supporter, or pardon me, basic supporter. Ryan Hay, pro supporter. Nick G, intermediate supporter. DNR, intermediate supporter. Miguel Uribe, pro supporter. Don Washburn, basic supporter. Harriet Stranahan, pro supporter. Stuart Silverstone, make sure I'm reading these right, intermediate supporter. Derek Eaton, pro supporter. How you doing, Derek? Jeffrey Farrington, intermediate supporter. Cy Murray, basic supporter. Eric Smalls, intermediate supporter. Brian Arps, intermediate supporter. Zachary Fisher, pro supporter. Donald Burgess, intermediate supporter. This one's just an email, but it's John Manna, intermediate supporter. Manfred Mackey, intermediate supporter. Dave Crossland, full sponsor supporter. Thank you, Dave. Pavel Bike, pro supporter. Gordon Stew, intermediate supporter. David Moon, basic supporter. Eric, intermediate supporter. John Steinberger, pro supporter. Tails 3R, so not a real name, but who cares? Pro supporter. Tommy Kelly, intermediate supporter. Ken Taylor, intermediate supporter. Zan Luku, intermediate supporter. Andrew B. Sullivan, intermediate supporter. Nicholas, pro supporter. Brett de Marianda, intermediate supporter. David, basic supporter. David Ottner, pro supporter. Dimitriel Iroskov, I'm sorry. Irostov would be intermediate supporter. Tony Finn, pro supporter. Taffer Dawatsa Razuva. Sorry. This is not a reflection on any of your names. This is a reflection on my reading. A pro supporter. George, full sponsor supporter. Thank you, George. Tom Shelley, basic supporter. Zoe Lindsay, full sponsor supporter. Thomas Newhouse, intermediate supporter. Firefly, intermediate supporter. Tracy Hall, pro supporter. David Orisco, intermediate supporter. Galactic and Beyond, full sponsor supporter. And Jeff Sandys, pro supporter. Just wanted to get that out of the way. You guys rock. Appreciate you a lot. Let's check out the chat. Takes a little bit for people to roll in, obviously. So we'll see who's here first. Oh, another great one from Ty. Thank you, Frank and Colin. Frank and Colin, I think you guys were here first on the last live stream. Try to let some people roll in. You know, before I start the review, if you are on X, make sure you repost and hit the like button. Then come over to my YouTube channel at Relearning Econ. Watch here because you can chat with your chat feed. You're only going to see X chatters. You come over here, there's more YouTube chatters. You can interact there. If you are on my channel right now, well, there's something you could do. That's like, right? That's like. Subscribe, hit that notification bell, and leave comments. Leave comments after the video. I'll reply to them all. I'm still a small channel, so I will hit you right back with replies to any comments you have. And make sure you're chatting in the live chat. We got to get that rolling there. It looks a little bit dead, right? I could do some live stream or thumbnail posts like that. I always do that. There we got Douglas. Finally, we got some people rolling in. Okay, let's print some hyperinflation. Let's go. What? Got the stone cold what thing going on. Anyways, a lot of fun. You can find me at patreon.com/relearning economics. As you just saw, called out some of my great Patreon subscribers, 50 of them in that list. Maybe the next stream, do another 50. See if your name gets called out. In a good way. Anyways, your week started. You guys are all working, grinding away. I feel for you. I'm grinding away too. Working, well, what I always do, calibrating models. I wouldn't call it work. It's fun. I like modeling. So not like underwear modeling, like Walmart, but like mathematical modeling. I mean, that's what I truly mean. Anyways, maybe. So I see some more people have rolled in the statistics. We get on to this video. Bring it
without hearing
here.
Someone refer to.
It's already yapping. Let me move myself over here. So the context of this video is there is a guy, I watch him a lot. He's got a lot of good takes. His show is called About That. It's on the CBC network, so the Canadian Broadcast Corporation. It is a crown corporation, so it is government news, but I always found it to be unbiased, so very down the center. Now, the conservatives up here would say it is very liberal biased, but I don't find that at all. I find them they're down the middle. I just think we have a very liberal culture here in Canada for the most part, and so you might get the expectations. One more check of the chat before we start the video, and then of course as the video's going on, make sure you put some comments in there, ask some questions. Maybe you're disagreeing with my take on him and you agree with him. Put it in the chat. Let me know. Deer Point Macro. Hey, Ty. Listening from my office in Charlotte currently. Geez, you got to be doing some work there, but I should be doing some work too. But I'm glad you could join in. Jamie. Hey, new here. Been enjoying your streams. Well, thank you for joining in. If you got any questions, put them in the chat, Jamie. If you disagree with what I got to say, Jamie, put them in the chat because I like that. I like interacting with you guys, right? I like new ideas. I like thinking outside of the box, so I'll accept anything. Just don't call me names. Don't do that. Don't make it feel like I'm on an X. So I deal with that all the time on X. It's a troll universe over there. So don't do that to me. Let's roll into this. Let's see what this man has to say.
One refer to
the national debt.
The national debt. The national debt.
It's big, massive, actually, but it's not new, right? The U.S. has been deep.
It's big. It's massive. It's huge. We can kind of see where the narrative's going right now.
Deep in debt for a while now. So why all of a sudden does it feel like everyone's getting a little panicky? Journalists, investors, politicians, economists. Well, for starters, there's this.
President Trump's one big beautiful bill passing in the House by the slimmest of margins.
The bill is passed.
We call it the one big beautiful bill.
Supporters say
The one big beautiful bill, isn't it? It's just very telling, the way our system's geared, that even the most staunch conservatives and the most staunch anti-government spending parties that come into play, they end up spending, right? It's part of the system, right? Government spending, part of GDP, right? Imagine just removing, 35% of your GDP in one chunk. We're going to eliminate government spending to a very high degree and deficit spending. It'll become surplus income. It's not really likely in the real world.
that bill making its way through Congress right now, it reimagines border security, immigration, introduces sweeping tax cuts. But one big downside is that these things are expensive. Overall, the Congressional Budget Office projects it could add an extra $2.8 trillion to the federal debt.
Now, I don't mean to sound like an MMTer here, because I'm not really an MMTer, but he should be. That could add 2.8 trillion of income to the private sector. But we'll carry on. Maybe he'll see the light. We'll see.
Over the next decade.
It's an astronomically large sum.
Okay, now, to be fair, there is a long presidential tradition of adding to the country's debt, and you certainly can't blame the size of the debt on Trump alone. But he did spend an awful lot of time swearing up and down that he wouldn't make the problem worse.
We'll hand him a little Bitcoin and wipe out our $35 trillion.
Use trillions and trillions of dollars to reduce our taxes and pay down our national debt.
I want to really make a lot of money, pay off debt.
And if the government's own number crunchers say Trump's plan will add trillions.
I love this. I don't know if you're around. Somebody else was so Deer Point Macro is saying you got to get you off the vapes, but I don't think they'll let y'all have that in Canada and get you onto what is ZYN. Interesting. And hey, Canada's pretty liberal up here. We legalized pot way before you guys did down there, state by state. So it might be. But I'll tell you, in my 20s, so I'm 41 now. In my 20s, I was a smoker, and I couldn't go on hikes. I love doing that stuff, right? I couldn't run and couldn't do any physical stuff. And then around 29 or 30, this is when vapes became very popular, and it changed my life, right? I could go running, hiking. I don't feel any effects from this. Now, I will say kids out there are putting THC oils in this. I got to be careful how I talk here. I don't want to get my stream. I'm trying to monetize my channel. And they start putting oils that shouldn't go in here, and they're getting popcorn lens. So there is problems with vaping out there if you use these inappropriately. But I think I use this in an appropriate manner. And I think it's better for my life. But I'll leave it at that.
What a lot of people don't realize is that even under current law, we're on this exploding path of debt relative to the size of the economy.
There's no question the United States is on a trajectory that's unsustainable.
So here's the trillion-dollar question. When does all of this go from just some mathy, abstract worry years off in the future to becoming everyone's problem?
Okay. I'll look that up.
Here's a look at the running national debt clock in the US. As of this recording, it's just over $36 trillion. Some of that is debt that gets swapped between governmental agencies, but the vast majority of that is real public-facing debt. Easily paid off if every single American would just pony up $100,000. But for context, the debt is double what it was just 10 years ago.
Hold on.
It's just over.
Let's pause that. This is my thumbnail. This is the golden shot right here. How's that? Now I'll get some screenshots from that. That'll be my thumbnail after the stream. I'll put a nice thumbnail up.
$1 trillion. Some of that is debt that gets swapped between governmental agencies, but the vast majority of that is real public-facing debt. Easily paid off if every single American would just pony up $100,000. But for context, the debt is about double what it was just 10 years ago. You can blame both Republicans and Democrats for that. And yes, some more than others, even setting the pandemic.
So still in mainstream news, there's no differentiation between private sector debt and government debt. So immediately the narrative jumps to, this is the level of federal debt and this is what you owe. But meanwhile, that's just income, right? So what happens in a treasury auction is primary dealers, which are banks, use reserves to buy the treasuries. Those reserves are exclusively created by the country's central bank, right? This is, I don't claim to be an MMTer, but this is where I'll agree with them. The central bank is a pseudo department of a country. You can have independence, but it's a charter signed by the government. They can come in and out of existence by a stroke of the pen, well, by Congress and with the president. So they are essentially a pseudo institution, and they are the only ones that can create reserves. Now they'll create it through open market operations. So they're buying these government treasuries, government securities in the secondary market and marking up the primary dealer's reserve accounts, or they can provide lending facilities, and the biggest one is the discount window lending facility. And this is where if a bank can't find the reserves they need to settle in the interbank market, they can go to the Fed window and get a loan. That creates, and then usually a very short-term loan from a day to 90 days, and that creates reserves. Those reserves are the only thing that are used in treasury auctions, right? So it's all that circle between commercial banks, the central bank, and the treasury, right? It's got nothing to do with credit money. Even if you are a big institutional person, you've got a commercial bank account, you're getting a broker, a primary dealer to purchase those in the primary auction, and then you have them. The reserves have to purchase them.
Pandemic aside, but consistently, all American presidents in the last 20 or so years have spent deep into the red. Add that all together, that's how you get to 30 or so trillion. But this alone isn't proof that there's a problem, because
Dr. T, while I'm here, I'm glad you're here for a short bit. Appreciate that. Where are you? Put you up. Good to see you. Glad you could drop in for a tiny bit amount of time. Colin, why does the U.S. not include state and municipal debt in their figures? Well, if you look at the Fed, you can aggregate all that up, right? So the thing is with a state and federal debt, they're not currency issues, so that's real debt they have to take on, right? They have to find that currency. They don't have central banks out there to create the USD to do that for them. So it's good to break apart municipality debt, state debt, county debt, and federal debt. It's good to break that apart along with private sector debt.
and this will sound crazy, we haven't yet established whether $30 trillion is a particularly big number. But we can figure that out by examining the US debt to GDP ratio. Yay! Because, to put it really simply, if I owe my friend $100, what makes that debt fine or catastrophic really depends on how much money I make in a year, right? Like, if I...
So he's describing the debt to GDP level. And you know what a very interesting thing, if you plot those out, if you look at household debt in the 2008 financial crisis, and the private debt to GDP ratio was well above 100. I can't remember. It might have peaked out at 175. So % of GDP. And government debt, federal government debt, was very low. Of course, during the crisis, federal government debt rose. Private sector debt, all that trend all through the 2010s. So that's something to keep in mind as he continues to describe his very conventional economic narrative that we seem to be going into here.
That $100 is an expense I might not be able to afford, but if I'm a billionaire, then who cares? And the US is actually a trillionaire. The US economy, by virtue of its size, can tolerate a surprising amount of debt, but not unlimited. Right now, the debt it has to eventually pay back to the public is just over what the US makes in a year. Just over 100% of its GDP, meaning its debt pile is the same size as the country's entire annual output. That is Second World War level debt. Except in 2025, there's no world war, and the US isn't spending a whole bunch of money to rebuild Europe.
The difference between the 21st century in the US and
So I try to tell this to people, right? A debt level is just a record of the debt. It's not an impact on the economy now. Oh, so your debt level is equivalent to all of GDP. You're measuring a stock against a flow. So what the hell are you doing there, right? There is an argument to measure deficits. So a flow. So deficits per year against, economic output per year, right? And then say, okay, well, that's a very high deficit level compared to the real output of the economy this year. What are we doing? Are we redistributing real resources and nominal income properly via government spending? Then you can start asking those questions. But the debt level itself is just it's a path-dependent accumulation of past deficits. It means nothing in the current day and age, right? So just measuring it like that is pretty insignificant. It's nonsensical, but it is part of the conventional economic narrative.
in the US in the 20th century is when we had an emergency in the 20th century, we cleaned up afterwards. We brought the debt back down. So we had World War II, it came back down. In the 21st century, Great Recession, it goes from 30 to 70. Pandemic goes from 70 to 100, and no one fixes anything.
So when does this big issue start actually becoming a big problem? Like, if the US is at 100% debt to GDP ratio, is there a higher number, a tipping point, where you can't just keep borrowing and carrying on? Well, like all things finance, there's
borrowing
no
from
light
itself.
switch moment where suddenly US finances collapse into a black hole, but 175%. 175. That is, according to the economists we spoke to, when things might start to unravel in a serious way. The thinking being, at that level, the interest payments on your debt...
Hold on. I don't know if I want to know his thinking. I don't know if I really want to know his thinking. So here he'll go into probably postulating some bogus ideas. But again, it's if you're just taking the debt level, it's already happened. It's in the past, right? It's not a reflection of what's happening currently, right? Even the interest payments, it's just becoming income for the private sector, right? And you can address that through taxation, et cetera, right? Really big emphasis here. What I'm hoping is he starts saying, okay, it's a 5% deficit to GDP ratio this year. If he starts getting into that, then it's going to pique my heterodox mind, right? Because that's relative to what we're producing in output this year. Not like this, it's essentially a part of the money supply, the debt, right? So that's all he's describing here. It's not real. It's not very useful. You really want to, if you're going to measure something like output and say, because we go back, he's saying, well, output, it's 100% of output this year. Well, that's your debt. You're measuring a stock against a flow. Come up with a flow variable and measure flow against flow, and then we can start talking.
Are likely so high relative to what you have to spend each year as a government that you simply can't raise taxes fast enough or cut spending deep enough to stay afloat. That's what happened to Greece. In the early 2010s, Greek debt ballooned past 175% of GDP. And in order to avoid default, the government was forced to cut essential services and raise taxes. The economy collapsed into a deep recession, and regular people paid the price with pension cuts, mass unemployment, all blanketed in anger.
Yes, Colin, you're Canadian, right? I'm glad. I'm pretty sure you're Canadian, right? So yeah, CBC. I guess the rest of the world's not really going to know what CBC is, but it is our news network here. Like we have, Colin, correct me if I'm wrong, we have CTV and then we have Global essentially as our two private sector big news corporations, and we got smaller ones that are probably just owned by either CTV or Global. It's probably owned by Bell and Rogers. Up here in Canada with our big corporations, they're few and small in between, so there are monopolies up here. What do we got here, Jamie? In a recent stream, you said you disagree with MMT's charterless explanation of taxes driving money and acceptance of value. Can you explain more on why you disagree and what explanation of fiat acceptance do you prefer? I have to nuance this. I don't disagree that taxation, government fees drives demand for a currency. What I said is it does not set a price level. There's no quantitative price level you can set. And so in modeling, theory's nice and all that, but I'm important. Like, how does the economy work? Like, what really sets the value of the dollar, right? And I couldn't, look at, what are the tax rates and all the fees being collected this year, go into currency pair markets and trade the US dollar on that knowledge, because it doesn't really, it's just a postulate, right? So I don't disagree that it's a huge demand factor for the currency, but setting a specific price level, and Warren Mosler goes kind of deep into that in his 7 Deadly Sins. That part I disagree with. There's no quantitative way you can measure that. So I don't disagree with the chartalist theoretical view per se. I'm just saying I would be wary to use that in a quantitative analysis.
Were defiant and angry over such demands. Now, some of them are sounding just plain scared. I'm afraid that worse days will come, says this man, much more difficult days.
And it took years, not a year, not 2 years, years and years for them to get back to the point where the economy was growing again.
Now, to be clear, the US is nowhere near that point right now, but the trajectory is accelerating. According to one estimate by the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, that's a nonpartisan policy group, if Trump were to deliver on all of the measures he promised during his presidential campaign, the debt to GDP ratio could rise to 143% in just 10 years.
Still, the debt to GDP ratio, right? You're accumulating all the past debt with the current economic situation of your country. What is real output, right? So measure a deficit spending to GDP or deficit spending to industrial output. Then get back to me. Do something real right now. Right now, we're using buzzwords. Debt to GDP ratio. Debt by a currency issue is kind of fraudulent, is because it's not debt. We want to start looking at private debt to GDP ratios, okay, we're halfway there. But then I would say, let's look at credit expansion to GDP ratios and really look at flow against flow. In system dynamics, we're very keen on stocks because it's the information of your system, and you can glean things from the stocks because it's a path-dependent variable in your system. It accumulates over time. Whatever happened in the past summates to that stock level. It can also, with system dynamics, with all your feedback loops, start to realize, okay, this stock doesn't matter. This is not actually information in the system. Now, some people could argue, so in the markets, people see the debt level, the US debt level go up, and they're trading currency pairs, and they're like, oh, okay, well, I'm dumping in my USD, I'm going into the Japanese currency. There could be an argument there, but I bet you statistically, you're not going to find much of a correlation.
Conservative estimate. Worst case, they figure it could rise as high as 161%. And their estimates are not unique. The Congressional Budget Office, so
how you doing?
That's the US government itself, they modeled even further ahead, projecting if all Trump's tax cuts were to be made permanent, US debt could reach 200% of GDP by 2047 and 250% by 2054.
So literally double it over the course of the next 30 years just from this legislation alone. So this is a very significant increase in our aggregate debt burden.
And here's the thing, the balance sheet doesn't even need to get that.
I don't want to make fun of the woman, but again, buzzwords, you know, big increase in our debt burden in the aggregate level. Okay, but what does that mean causally? Like, what does that really mean? And so you look at, you know, some heterodox schools out there, and that means income for the private sector. Okay, so then ask the question, what does more income for the private sector mean, right? Now, of course, the conventional view is, oh, that's inflationary. You're basically giving a UBI to everybody. That's what you're doing, direct household spending. Now, obviously, not everybody holds government securities. But you got to ask, well, what if the people spend that? Doesn't that become profits for firms? And if firms do a number of things with profits, one thing, they pay their workers, they pay off their bills, they give some nice cuts to their CEOs, give out some dividends. What's the main thing they do? They invest in their capital stock. If you invest in your capital stock, what happens? You have more output. What happens if you have more output? You have more employment. So those are the things you really want to drill down into, like in a circular fashion. These guys are stopping at the word debt and aggregation.
That bad for real problems to show up. All it really takes is for investors to lose faith that the government has things under control.
Once capital markets stop believing that Congress will ever get its act together, I mean, literally things could unravel.
So Deer Point Macro says, from a currency standpoint, not much movement, but fixed income and CDS markets. Confirm what CDS markets are. You're a market guy, Deer Point, more than me. I'm more of a macroeconomic guy. Don't make me email Doug right now. I massively care about this, despite it being a nothing burger. Guys, what is a CDS market? Excuse my ignorance, but I do not know everything. I'm just kind of curious about that. So from a currency standpoint, not much at all. Okay, correct statistically. And then Deer Point goes on. Increased debt trends tend to lead to a rise of term premia. Oh, geez. And a sell-off of long end of the curve, so there are at least market implications. Yeah, no, I agree. A credit default swap. Thank you. And Jamie's on it. Geez, I talk so much of the ills of. I use credit default swaps often in an analysis because a lot of people in the MMT community see, well, let's just get rid of government bonds or treasuries, right? And I say, well, doesn't that open the door to private sector financial instruments like credit default swaps? Meanwhile, we've got smarter people than me in the live chat right now using the abbreviations, and I don't know what the hell they're talking about. Thank you, guys. Just goes to prove, you know, it's okay not to know things. Let's carry on with the video. Oh, look at Zeza. Sorry, Zeza. Every time, every stream, I'm going to do it. Even you're putting it in the chat. Thank you, guys.
Tomorrow.
Buying U.S. government debt is seen as one of the safest investments in the world because the U.S. has always paid its debts on time, in full. In fact, when the U.S. paid...
So this is something I always tell to the MMT crowd, that more progressive side that says, well, we should just stop with the bonds. We can just overdraft the Treasury account. You know, the Fed can create their reserves, credit the proper commercial bank accounts, and away we go. But it does provide a safe store value. Like you can think about it, investment banks, retirement funds, all sorts of funds use these risk-free assets, right? And if you eliminate that, you open up the door in the private sector for them to create risk-free assets, pseudo risk-free assets. And then you're really opening the door to the financial engineering of products we don't understand. And we look at Dear Macro, what was the the term for the bundled mortgages that happened during 2008. What did they call those? Geez, I'm forgetting the name right now. Right. And so we didn't quite, they were marketed as, these really great assets. And of course they were traded in the financial sector. And meanwhile, they were absolute junk underneath when you pick them apart. And so that's why I always see the risk. And I'm kind of going off on a tangent here about the elimination of treasuries from the market, and because they're structurally not needed if the currency issue can just issue currency. And I would also suggest mortgage-backed securities. Thank you, Zaza. You guys are so smart. Maybe you guys should just run these live streams. Thank you, Zaza. I appreciate that. Mortgage-backed securities and credit default, CDOs, options, credit default options. Geez, Doug, the MMT macro trader, kind of like your point. Very, very smart guys. All you guys are really smart. Big trading guy. He's always telling me these terminologies, right? And I'm into like gross fixed investment, right? Consumption, right? Actual industrial output. Those are the things I'm really interested in. So I have to learn all these terminologies. What we got here from Jamie? From an MMT perspective, though, the interest paid on treasuries decreases the fiscal space for social programs, transfer payments, which can help vulnerable, high propensity to consume people. You have to remember, though, ultimately, just stopping at that analysis, sure, as a base case, you could suggest that, but you got to realize that extra income may be going to rich people. Those rich people obviously are owning equities in the market. That money can turn up as profits, right? And that can turn up as initial stock purchases, right? Which actually helps create gross investment into the capital stock. Like I said before, you increase the capital stock, you're increasing output. That means you're increasing physical space. You're allowing for more government spending in the future, right? It's a dynamic system. We don't want to get stuck. We don't want to get stuck in static snapshots of the economy, right? There's always a continuous system, right? So the act of putting more income, it doesn't matter where, and obviously there's distributional issues and equality issues we're seeing in capitalist economies around the world. But the act of putting that income in the private sector will lead to a portion of that becoming gross investment into the fixed capital stock of a nation in the private sector, which produces more output.
When the U.S. pays its debt by issuing bonds and then by paying investors.
Here we go. So, yeah, clarification here. Collateral debt obligations. Thank you, dear Macro. Appreciate it. And then Douglas, another pretty big market guy. I'm not a market guy, but I got a lot of market people here. You guys are my assisters when it comes to the market stuff. That's great. And of course, Douglas Dwell, good buddy of mine, mortgage-backed securities. Carry on with the video.
Interest rate for buying those bonds. You'll hear investors referring to that bond rate as the risk-free rate, meaning it's not the biggest return on investment in the world, but it's just about guaranteed. So what happens if investors start to worry that maybe the US government doesn't have its fiscal house in order? What if investing in US debt isn't completely risk-free?
The crucial day is the day they lose confidence in the ability of the United States to repay in a timely fashion. And if they lose faith in that, they start jacking up the interest rates that they charge the U.S.
Okay, so this is the crux of the conversation, and this is like, dear Macro, you're on X, Douglas, you're on X. We see the Austrian economic perspective, and this is the crux of it, right? That one day people will lose confidence in the USD. As the world reserve currency. Now, I don't see that overnight because we have like the SWIFT payment system. We have so much settlement systems based on the USD as that reserve currency. I don't see that changing overnight. And I don't see an impulse of US debt changing that overnight. even a big impulse. I just don't see it. There's no other settlement currency out there to change that reality. So it gets into like a philosophical debate about some future outcome. Eventually, like last week we did Ray Dalio's postulates about, you know, the rise and fall of empires, and one of the last things that go is the reserve currency aspect of it, and maybe we're moving towards that. But right now the Japanese, or pardon me, the Chinese yuan, they're not positioning themselves to be a settlement currency. I think they've come out and said that's not the desire for them, and it's a burden. You know, it is a burden because you have conflicting policy, right, of, you know, what's needed domestically and what's needed internationally. The euro, maybe over time, but the underlying countries of the European Union, are they on the rise, or are they on the decline, or are they on a steady state level? You know, does confidence in that supersede the USD? It's a tough call.
As compensation for the risk we don't pay back, or they cut you off entirely.
And that's important because that's where a bad situation can turn worse. The riskier the investment, the more expensive it can become to pay back. And all kinds of factors, from tariffs to inflation to how highly changeable US policy on anything can be from day to day, they all get baked in.
Bonds, they've had huge move the last few days.
Debt deficits and tariffs, curve steepening. We're over 50 basis points in
debt deficits and tariffs, curves are steepening, right? This is how you watch these business news, right? And they just pump, it's like a sports game. They just pump that shit up so much. And that's an example. Who's that other bald-headed guy that he's just really crazy on these shows? I forget his name. Quite a funny guy. But geez, there's an example of conventional pumped up economics on mainstream news.
There are a lot of indicators out there that makes the bond market a little nervous.
The risks aren't that treasuries aren't going to be paid out. The risks are more that as you look at interest rates, they're going to have to be higher because people are going to demand higher interest rates to be willing to hold so much U.S. debt.
And those higher
I don't know. What is Deer Point? What do you think about that, right? Ultimately, like, so there's lots of academic papers out there that basically says the policy rate and the short-term end of securities really dictates the long-term end. The long-term end, of course, will have a duration premium risk stacked on top of it and some permutations of market news, but eventually it tends, plus the premium risk, to the policy rate level in the short end yields. So ultimately, I've seen every indication that the Fed sets the policy rate, and that trickles on down to yields. Obviously, there's market permutations, like news events might switch it over time, but I don't see any indication that the Fed ultimately can't step in and control rates. And even on long duration bonds, the Fed could really step in and control the yield curve altogether if it wants to. So that's, yeah. I don't know if I agree with that woman there talking. I'm sure she's a lovely person. She's Canadian, so she's a fellow Canadian. If she ever sees this, and I don't want CBC suing me, I'm sure she is a lovely person, very respectable in the industry.
Higher interest rates can snowball real fast. According to JP Morgan, if bond rates rise by just 1%, the US would have to pay $300 billion more in interest to its debt holders every year.
So the private sector would have to receive whatever billion dollars of income extra every year. Let's just rephrase that.
On top of the $1.1 trillion it's already paying in interest.
$1.1 trillion it's paying in income every year.
And then once you throw in the extra $100 billion in interest that Trump's bill is projected to add annually, you can start to see why some people are getting nervous.
The thing that we always worry about with irresponsible youth is you give them a credit card, they run up a bill, and now they have to get a new credit card to pay off the old credit card. Well, the U.S. borrowed $1.8 trillion last year, and over $1 trillion of it was to pay interest on previous borrowing. So we are perilously close to the moment when you might want to worry a lot.
These things can spiral out of control.
Perilously close to the Treasury extracting reserves from commercial banks, which are primary dealers, which themselves just receive these reserve funds from the central bank, the Fed, which they just create out of thin air when they monetize, past Treasury debt and give out discount window loans. Perilously close to just continually doing that. I don't know. I don't know about this. I put a quote, or not a quote, but a tweet thread on X, I guess, or a post thread about quantitative easing. And we went through the entire, we pumped up reserves after 2008, right? But this isn't cash that's circulating in the private sector and commercial bank balances, right? So did we get perilously close then? Because I'm pretty sure the commentators like him, this guy on the screen, or no, however the hell he's looking, same type of guy, different face, different name, but was saying the exact same thing. We're perilously close, right? It reminds me of Peter Schiff. Always the next crisis. It's coming up this year.
That's kind of the big risk.
And that risk now has credit agencies on alert too. Just a few weeks ago, Moody's stripped from the US the very last of its highest tier credit ratings. Their decision, they wrote, was because of the increase over more than a decade in government debt and interest payment ratios to levels that are significantly higher than similarly rated sovereigns.
They said, you have too much debt and you have to pay too much interest. You have a problem. That to me is more alarming.
But all of this is still pretty abstract, right?
What? So that you're comparing relative to another sovereign nation that is not a reserve currency issuing nation, right? And America, despite its decline in industrial output over the years, still a massive producer of real output, right? And you're comparing something that's not relative, right? So past debt, that's all it is. It doesn't represent the current industrial might of the US. And I'm pumping up the US as a Canadian. Here you go, America. I'm pumping you up. You got a strong economy. I wish you guys produced more industrially, but I'm having a hard time. These are buzzwords that don't actually relate to the real economic activity of a nation.
Maybe you're wondering, okay, but how does this affect regular people?
How does it affect regular people? This is it. Here we're going to find out. Look at these graphics.
Totally understandable that the financial health of the US government may not be the first thing everyday Americans wake up each morning and dwell upon, but what happens in Washington doesn't stay in Washington. The bond rate, for example, doesn't just affect investors, or even how expensive it is for the US government to pay those investors. It's also considered the baseline for mortgage rates, auto loans, business loans, credit card rates. If bond rates go up, often so too do all of those.
And so that's going to be the real problem, is that you can imagine mortgage rates persist at high returns, higher yields, and therefore higher cost to customers.
It means that you're going to pay thousands of dollars more when you try to take out a car loan, or it means you're going to pay thousands of dollars more when you try to take out a small business loan to start your small business. So all of this reverberates.
So they're just speculating that rates are going to go higher and higher, and explosive rates along with explosive hyperinflation. But again, this is the same rhetoric we always hear from these conventional folks, and we don't actually see it. We might see a slight rise. Even look at it. I don't laugh. Nobody likes higher costs of living. But if you compare it to the 1980s and the oil shocks in the 70s, what we experienced after COVID was relatively minor. We just been used to this close to zero rate environment for so long that it was a bit of a visual shock to the system. And you're right, people probably over leveraged themselves. So in houses and the mortgages they took on, probably is an issue there. And it's worth a secondary discussion there that low long-term rates might enable riskier behavior by individuals that can't afford to take on that leverage. There's an argument there. But the main argument right now is that you should like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and comment either in the chat or after the video, trying to bump this algorithm up. Just a short story. This YouTube channel started 3 years ago as a system dynamic tutorial channel. I did some work with some highly paid consultants, and they said, you need to do a live stream channel. I said, okay. What? On my Stone Cold trip. But anyways, so just, help me manipulate the algorithm, right now, and hopefully somewhere down the line, it just kind of, does its own thing. And they said I also have to be very controversial. So that's why I'm going, what? I should be drinking a beer, like crashing a beer, finding somebody that can stone cold stun on live stream. If you're over on X, you're watching this feed, come over here, chat on the YouTube feed, because that's cool. Please. Thank you. Let's carry on with the video.
Real economy in ways that households can feel in like super meaningful ways.
And then there's the simple fact that every dollar the US pays in interest on debt is a dollar not spent on something else. Right now, interest payments make up about 14% of the federal budget.
There you go. So I was born in 1983, so I wasn't really aware of like economic situations, to that degree. But, I often talking, like I was brought up by my grandparents, so they're a wealth of information. They've already been in the housing market since the 60s at that point, but they lived through those high rates. And they, of course, every 10 years or so bought a new house, sold their old one. Right. And they told me, right, the shocks of the 80s with those high interest rates, and it's just something we did not experience post COVID, right? It's you hear the rhetoric, oh, we've got to bring down rates now, and maybe I don't agree with the natural rate of interest rate or some policy. I don't agree with that because we're in a dynamic system. But 4% sounds kind of reasonable for the cost of money, right? And of course, the policy rate is an upstream effect of all the other policy rates in the economy, including yields. But it's certainly not the 20%. I think it was even higher up here in Canada, Colin. Or was that Canadian? I think it was a little bit lower. The cost of funds was a little bit lower in the US and a little bit higher up here. That'd be a good thing to look at.
More than what the US spends on national defense. And the way this is all going, it's not out of the question for interest on debt to eventually become a more expensive line item than Social Security or healthcare, too.
You are crowding out important investments that need to happen by taking up a lot of fiscal space.
And if everything gets squeezed, what happens when something goes wrong? When the world is suddenly faced.
Oh man, I'm gonna have a frickin' aneurysm when I hear that. Absolute frickin'. This goes back to Joan Robinson's explanation that nominally investments precede savings. So you're not crowding out anything in a nominal sense at all. Like the bottom line is you have consumption, but consumption comes from consumption goods, right? So you're never crowding out anything. You're actually increasing, you're crowding in investment, right? Because you're putting more income into the system to be used to create more gross investment into the fixed capital stock. Obviously, we can acknowledge we can only take out so much out of the ground, real resources out of the ground at one time. But if you look at the capital utilization rate of the United States, it hovers between 75 and 80%, right? So there is always room. So, and right now it is not at 99%. So what she's saying here is completely fallacious. I hate that shit so much. Hate it. Drives me nuts.
Suddenly face to face with another pandemic or war or global recession.
We're not going to have the capacity to respond with as much energy and as much vigor from a fiscal perspective.
Yeah, and you won't have the capacity if you're not, investing in your capital stock, right? There's no such thing as crowding it out. If you're crowding it out, then you have less capital stock, and if you're not, you have to understand, right, that you want to try to push a little bit of your idle resources to build up for a scenario where you have either an international crisis, a pandemic, right? You want that capital stuff. Because listen, the US was having a little bit of trouble with toilet paper. You had no goddamn toilet paper during the pandemic. So build some toilet paper factories. And if that impulse comes via deficit spending, maybe the government says, you know what? We're starting a program and we want more toilet paper in our country in case of a situation where we can only provide our toilet paper domestically, right? And so you give some government grants to firms, let's say. You don't have to pay these grants back, the government says. But guess what? You've got to build some toilet paper factories. So we got more toilet paper during the next pandemic. So we got toilet paper. That's not crowding out any investment. It's in giving an impulse to investment. It drives me nuts, these conventional economics, PhD academics yapping what they saw in their first year textbook, the ManQ textbook. Best use, you know what those ManQ Econ textbooks are good? You put about 5 of them in the back of your trunk. And in case your car ever breaks down on the side of the road, you can take those textbooks out because they're real thick and dense, and you can light them on fire and you can stay warm. That's about what they're good for.
Fiscal perspective, because a bunch of that space has kind of been taken up.
Once you have a debt crisis, you can't issue new debt to get out of that. There's no easy solution.
Now, there are Republicans who claim Trump's
great, big, beautiful bill
actually helps solve the debt problem because, the way they see it, things like boosting energy production,
huge, big, great big, beautiful bill. Only Trump could reverse, the ideology. He's coming in and he had what was Musk's department of, what did they call that? Just another stupid meme name they came up with, whatever that department was. And then instantly it's reversed because of the way the system is. And it's a big, beautiful spending bill. It's just fascinating how fast he can switch on a dime. Maybe give credit to the guy. I don't know.
Cutting entire government departments. That'll kickstart growth and expand the tax base. Then throw revenue from tariffs into the mix. And they argue that should be enough to offset all the new spending.
Okay, this guy, I forget his name. Adam, it might be his name. Does he not know? Like, there have been people that have come on the CBC to just explain this. It's not revenue. You are literally redistributing the income that importing firms in the US, domestic importing firms, are making, because now they got to pay a tax bill, and giving it to the government, right? So on one hand, he's saying, well, we're reducing government spending, so we expand fiscal space in the economy so we can utilize more capital resources. But in the meantime, but we're also going to take the profits away from domestic companies, so they can't even bother trying to utilize the spare capacity in the economy. God, it's so silly that persists like that. That's when I see it on X all the time. Big win. We're collecting $400 billion this quarter, or whatever the number is. It's like, no, you're taxing $400 billion this quarter. Congratulations, you're a taxing regime. Great, good for you. You're taxing and one of the worst tax regimes that I've always stated was taxes on corporations, firms, and small businesses. And that's what tariffs are. right? It's a tax on business. You do not want to tax your productive sector of the economy. It's very destabilizing in a dynamic system, right? You're literally extracting profits discreetly. And it might come in as one big tax bill at the end of the year, might be semi-annual, might be quarterly, it might be monthly. That's the worst thing you can do. If you're going to tax, just tax the end user. I know that sucks for households, but trust me, you're going to pay for it anyways if they just tax firms that you're buying the products from. You'll get it in a different discrete package called price inflation and price gouging. So it's much more stable to tax a stable stream, which is household income. And I've always advocated for that. So I'm as you can tell, I'm highly against tariffs. I think it's the worst thing. And why would you want to discourage if we're moving into a globalized world where we want world peace? Why would you throw up barriers to world peace? Because one of the biggest is where you can exchange with your neighbors. And so if we consider each country our neighbor and we're doing business with them, what's the best thing to do business? Drop any financial barriers to doing that business. It drives me nuts. Oh, we got the ICE police. Whoa.
And put the U.S. on a trajectory of 3% growth for the next few years. But not everyone's buying it.
The calculations that are released by the White House suggesting that this tax cut could pay for itself.
Listen to this music.
They're essentially a work of fiction. They don't have.
This music's like a B level horror movie. It's like it's getting you pumped. I'm getting pumped up right now from the music.
Model behind them.
I went back and looked, and forecasting 10 straight years of 3 percentage point growth. There were only 6 quarters in the history of the U.S. when that was a good forecast. They all occurred in the 20th century. None of them happened in the 21st century. So it's not something I think anyone should count on. It's hard to move the growth rate of an economy. Moving it by 0.3% on average over 10 years, huge success. A full percentage point, unimaginable.
In fact, a range of nonpartisan analysts, including the U.S. government's Congressional Budget Office, have argued that under almost any realistic model, the U.S. debt is on a sharp upwards trajectory. So what's the bottom line? Well, pretty much everyone agrees. Right now, America still has time to change course. But as one economist told us, debt crisis...
Change course on what? Is it your industrial base, what you can produce? Because I'm not agreeing anything about this debt conversation, right? My main concern is that, how are you, as a Canadian, the same thing applies to my country. And, I root for, Trump will be gone in a couple of years unless he does something incredibly stupid, like trying to stay in for a third term. But he's going to be gone, and Canada and the U.S. will be bros again. We've always been bros. Yeah, we're the little small peon brother. I get it, but we're bros. 9/11 happens, land all your planes here. We'll take you in. We're there for you. World War, we'll be the cannon fodder. We'll whatever soldiers we got, we'll put them on the front lines. We're there for you, right? So I root for the U.S. Dodge, yes, that's what it was. The Department of Government Efficiency. Jamie put in Dodge. Okay, Dr. T, it was good seeing you. We're back Friday. Mr. Keynes, Dr. Keynes, the economic live stream this Friday. Hope to see you there, Dr. T. My aspect is I want a strong U.S. economy, right? I want you guys to be, independent in a lot of your production, right? I want stability for your country, because stability for our southern neighbors, stability for us up here in Canada. So that's what concerns me, right? I don't want to see a slow decline yet in the American empire. I don't want to see that. Right. So my concerns about it's not too late are things around the American productive capacity, not the debt, a level of debt, which is an accumulation of past decisions about, finances and the way you structure your nominal economy. What can you produce? That's what really so I don't know what Andrew here. Andrew's his name. I don't know what he's talking about there. I don't agree with. Oh, I just screwed it up. Let me go back.
Unimaginable.
In fact, a range of nonpartisan analysts, including the U.S. government's Congressional Budget Office, have argued that under almost any realistic model, the US debt is on a sharp upwards trajectory. So what's the bottom line? Well, pretty much everyone agrees right now America still has time to change course, but as one economist told us, debt crises happen slowly and then all at once. And when that happens, every solution is painful.
Well, that's that. That was that video. And as you can tell, very conventional thinking. Disappointed. CBC, do better. Come on. Do better. I hope Andrew sees this video. Hopefully it comes up in his feed, because like the algorithm recognizes. Now I have to pause and stop because there's a whole like copyright infringement. So I have to always make sure if I'm doing a reaction video, I have to stop it, analyze it to make sure I'm not just playing the video through, because that's like legitimate copyright infringement. So if you're a little bit upset that I stop it a little too much, it's not just to analyze what the person's saying. It's actually to make sure I don't get nabbed with a copyright strike on my YouTube channel. I hope you will consider on taking Andrew Coyne next. Who's that? Colin, who's that? Is he a CBC guy? Let me know in the chat. What else we got here? Jamie. I agree about 0% taxes on corporations and businesses, but what do you think about using the same tax bracket schedule for taxes on capital gains as on wages? Have you modeled that? I have modeled that, and in aggregate, capital gains is a form of income for the non-financial private sector, so for the household, and you can do that if you're taxing the end beneficiary, so the person that receives like a capital gain on selling an asset to another. Sure, I'm fine with that, because that doesn't actually affect the real resources that are producing for an economy. So I'm okay with that. I'm okay with a more robust tax system for the rich. I know people will say, well, I'll just drive the rich to move their assets abroad. Whatever, there's financial assets. Really, I don't care. Right? You can't move the railroads abroad. Can't move the fact. Well, you can in the U.S. case. You can over time, and that's why I say don't tax corporations and productive firms. But as for capital gains, yeah, as long as it's robust and it makes sense and it's not just a bureaucracy, I'm sure I'm on board with it. Even as a person that trades, right? I'm fine with that, because in Canada we have some robust rules of day trading. And what becomes income. So up here, over a certain amount, your capital gains on trading, right? So you're buying low, selling high, right? And it could be in a matter of 15 minutes. Capital gains actually become income anyways, right? So if that's your way of generating income as a private sector individual, that's income, right? So I've got no problem with taxation of capital gains. What else? Dear Point, I missed some questions here. Why you include capital deepening? You tend to see growth slows as capital per worker rises and less. Well, I'm talking about the fixed capital stock of a country, right? So, and what comes out of that is then you have, if you look at it mathematically, let's say you aggregate everything into one capital stock. And it's worth $300 billion, whatever. Just a fictional number. And then you have what's your capital utilization rate, which sits around between 75 and 80% in the U.S. economy. And that's driven causally simply by the amount of employment needed. So you're employing more people, using more of your factory. Then you have something that's a little more intangible. And some academics out there like Steve Keen are addressing the capital output ratio. What can you create by like 300 billion in capital? Is it 3 your ratio? So that means in a year you'll create 100 billion in output, right? And Steve says that's primarily driven by energy use, and that's a little deeper and beyond my scope. So then you have that, and that creates your actual output. And then, of course, when it comes to employment, then you got to look at labor productivity. So if productivity goes up, you need less employment for that output to be created. And people say, well, that's a little bit detrimental. But what that means, if factories and productive firms don't have to employ as many people, their profits go up. What do they do when their profits go up after they're done paying their CEOs and their other business expenses, giving out dividends? They increase their spending into the gross fixed capital of the nation, and the cycle repeats. So, and then in that case, then employment actually just bumps up again without a corresponding bump in productivity. That's why I'm always very interested in the fixed capital stock of a nation. So the real assets, right, that produce something. That's your economic growth. That's what's employing people over time. And of course, there's many variables that feed into that. And did CBC at okay, it wasn't that Andrew though? Wasn't that Andrew there that I just had on? Conservative. Okay, let me look him up. That's it. Let me look up Andrew Coyne. Let me just stand by, guys. I got to look this guy up so I know the face. Andrew. Oh, is he the brown-haired guy? Canadian. Oh, yes, him. He's very okay. He's on the CBC at issue panel. So up here we have this panel on CBC, and it's our political panel, and it's on a show called At Issue. Colin knows who I'm talking about. And yes, he is. But you know what, Colin? If you compare him to the conservative pundits down in the States, he seems quite liberal. Now, I know but I kind of like that CBC's willing to have him on because he does provide that balanced perspective. But you know what? I think we should do a reaction video to the At Issue panel. Good idea. That's coming up in the future. You heard it here. You heard it here first. Colin asked for it. Ty Keynes is going to give it to you. Absolutely. I know who you're talking about. Dear Macro, just a question, but what if instead of seeing profits go up, you don't get cap expenditure spending, but buybacks? Now, that's true, but that's true. And now I did a post, I don't know if you saw it on X a couple of weeks ago, that I likened stock buybacks as a lagged version of expenditure into the fixed capital stock. So I know this doesn't translate exactly, but if a company buys back a bunch of its equity shares, and depending if these shares are paying a dividend, and you can change the dividend, of course, then you have less of a dividend cost on your business, right? So you have more. Now, depending on where you got your operating costs, then you've got profits, and you got your net profits, profits after taxes. Wherever you put that in there, you have more funds, you have more cash flow, because now you're not paying out dividends to external owners. Now, there's ways you could just lower the dividends or pay more dividends after your stock back, and it eliminates that. But now that you're not beholden to your shareholders, you now have more cash flow to then in the future put into your capital expenditures in the future. Now, I'm not saying that statically holds every time, but if we look over the long term, that could be one of the effects. I haven't looked statistically, so deer, you might have deer point macro. I'm not calling deer point macro deer. I'm just shortening it to deer. We'll leave it at deer point. You might have some statistical examples, and it'd be worthwhile looking at the rate of change of stock buybacks, the rate of change of profits, and the rate of change of capital investment, real capital investment, to see if there's any correlations. We can see data. Is there any lagged correlations? It was something I was just postulating. I don't know. Don't take my word for it. It's just a thought experiment to think about. And we go on from Deer Point. For example, now we have seen a huge rise in profits in the US, yet CapEx is down and buybacks are up, which is a little, which does a little for the real capital stock. Agreed. Bottom line, the real capital stock will not expand if you don't have investment. So it's something now I'm going to go look at the data after the live stream. I can't do it on the fly. I'm just going to look at it. I'm going to get back on the next stream. Maybe I'll address it on Friday because I like to carry on these conversations, right? And I like, thank you for bringing this up because these are very valid questions that we need to address. And it was something I addressed in very abstract form, that what buybacks could create. So maybe there's huge buybacks now, but that's opening up to a bigger cash flow in the future because they're paying less dividends. So now I'm not saying that happens in every case, because they could simply buy back a bunch of stock and then raise their dividends, right, to give more value to what the stock is left on the market. I'm not saying that couldn't happen as well, but it's just a causal path that could happen. But it'd be interesting to look at longer term data and those trends and see if you could find some correlations. Joro, I've saw you a lot on the Steve Keen channel. Greetings, Quebec. What part of Quebec? You in Montreal? Quebec City? Which part of Quebec are you in? Greetings from Vancouver, Canada. Welcome. What? Sorry, that's Stone Cold Steve Austin. You know, everybody's gonna watch this live stream, and they're gonna be like, "Why is he going what all the time?" It was Stone Cold Steve Austin's catch thing, his promo thing he did way back in the late 1990s. Nobody watches wrestling anymore. I don't watch wrestling anymore. I see a little bit of the John Cena retirement, but I'm not like when I was young in my late teenage years and early 20s where Stone Cold and The Rock. Anyways, Stone Cold would always go like, you'd say something to him and he'd be like, what? And then the whole crowd would get into it. Anyways, that's why I'm doing that if you're wondering. But anyways, greetings back to you. Dear Point, follow up. If you want CapEx for the S&P and aggregates, I can shoot you an email with the data and buybacks if you need. What I'll do is I will right now go on to X because I don't think we have each other's email, and I'm going to DM you. Have we DM'd each other before? I've turned off my DMs on X because it just got too crazy now with some of the crazy people that want to send me messages. Let's look up Deer Point. There you are. And I'm going to shoot you the DM with my email. Keynes at gmail.com. Make sure I don't say it on the air. Not that, any of my Patreon members, you can DM me if you want to communicate by email. Of course, you're more than welcome. Dear Point, I send it. Now, Dear Point, are you Dan? Is that your account? Or is that a different person? I know I've got... I'm pretty sure you guys might be the same person. I'm not sure. Do you have a personal account and your name's Dan? Or am I confusing you with somebody else? Anyways, I sent you the DM on X. And I would actually like that data. Like you, I love playing with data. So I would sure appreciate it. And maybe I'll post something, or maybe I'll send you something in private before I post it and see what you think. It might be interesting. Reagan Boychuk in the house. Reagan, another Canadian. Reagan, were we beefing a few months ago? Are we done beefing? Is the beef over, Reagan? Dan who? Let me look. Let me just... for some reason, I thought you got... It might have been like, the same account. Let's see if I just type in Dan, if I can find him. I can't find Dan. Can't find it. If you're asking Dan who, it's definitely not you. Definitely not. For some reason, I thought you guys were the same person. I know he's into like Doug's work, and he's a market type guy. And I think he's posted some statistics and stuff. And I just thought, okay, that must be Deer Point Macro, and that's just your personal account. Maybe. So there you go. It's clearly not the case. Aaron Davies in the house. What do you got to say? Between 2003 and 2012, stock buybacks amounted to an astounding 54% of corporate profits, which could have gone to higher wages, increased investments, plants and equipment, and public investment. So in my X post, this is what I argued, is that even though it's an equity stake in a company, in a developing corporation, you have your IPO and you're trying to fund yourself and your operations. And in that sense, it's not a whole lot different than putting out a bunch of corporate bonds and funding your corporation that way. Just one's a debt instrument and one's an equity instrument. But as your corporation matures, you might want to unload those equity stakeholders on your balance sheet and just buy them out, right? And then that cash flow that could potentially go to dividends becomes your cash flow that you could invest in the future. So Deer Point was mentioning there that right now, like you're saying, there's an enormous amount of buybacks. I think he was saying profits are going up, but there's little capital expenditure going on. But we may get to a phase, and it could be the next business cycle, or we're at a point in the business cycle, or a longer term business cycle, that we have a bunch of because remember, we're coming out of these tech companies. All through the 2000s, the 2010s, they were all just like incubating companies. And so they're putting out their IPOs, putting out corporate bonds, right? And another thing, Deer Point, to look at is what are the holdings of corporate bonds out there? Are they starting to decline along with share buybacks, right? Because if you look at it from that aggregate perspective, right, these are now tech companies going into a mature state like Google, Meta, et cetera, and so they've plateaued in that sense, and they don't need all those shareholders. They don't need the corporate bonds, and we may go into a period where now their actual cash flow itself can fund future capital expenditure. And so we might not see that right away. So we might be in that period of share backs over the last decade or so, right? And we're not seeing a lot of capital expenditures because, they're paying out the bonuses to their executives, et cetera, finally giving out the pie to everybody. Because for a lot of times they were a negative cash flow. They weren't making profits, right? So now you've got to reward your stakeholders, but eventually that should turn into just more profits. And at that point, depending if there is something to invest in, the next big technology, we could see a huge boost in capital expenditures. And of course, I'm just postulating this. I'm not a fortune teller, but that's a route where we can go, and that would explain what we're seeing at this point. Anybody else have some? Oh yeah, Reagan. Guess we're not. So 90% of all U.S. profits has been spent on dividends over the last 30 years. Does not support the idea that such cash flow pays for dividends. Well, we could need exact numbers, like in aggregate, maybe, but in other, if you look at individual companies, right, it depends on their industry, what they need to spend in CapEx. But bottom line, explain why they're buying back these shares, right? They're paying out their shareholders, right? So instead of their shareholders going into the secondary market and selling off their shares, driving down the share price, they can just come in and buy them out, right? and those shareholders get rewarded on a stock that's probably appreciated over time, right? And that's the whole point, right? Like those people were investors in that company, right? It's just like the people that issued corporate bonds, right? It was a debt instrument to that company, and they got interest on the return, and then the principal's paid off. Like that's part of capitalism. That's what would happen if I had a large corporation and a bunch of people invested in me. Eventually, I just wouldn't need those shares out there. I'd buy them all out and pay them all, get them off my balance sheet all together, right? And now I'm dealing with less on my balance sheet, so it's bound to happen, right? And that could be a long-term trend over time. What else we got here? And Aaron went on, such as infrastructure, all of which would have increased consumer demand, the engine of economic growth. Well, here's the thing. If you just give a bunch of money, yeah, it goes to rich people. It's problematic. The rich keep on getting richer. They just spend it too, right? It's just income from that. They've left a less liquid asset and got a more liquid asset, cash, which will either tie up in new investments, so new IPOs that come out, which those IPOs will be capital. They will be buying capital resources, fixed capital, to grow the economy, or they'll just take that money and they'll build a brand new mansion, which employs people. It becomes profits for smaller firms like contractors, et cetera, et cetera. They in turn will have to buy capital stock. It could be a saw, could be a new truck, right? And they'll be able to produce more output, right? So like in aggregate, that's the way I see it. I don't see it any other way. If it wasn't, our economies would be in depression, right? If these buybacks were that bad. Right. So I just see it as a natural evolution of capitalism. I know, like from the progressive side, it seems terrible because you're like, well, you could just increase the wages of your workers. Well, that's a market demand thing, right? You could, but remember, these corporations are in it for profit. They have a profit motive. So obviously they're seeing a motive in the stock buybacks. And as a small business owner myself, I did it for my monthly income, which was profits. I was a sole proprietor. So what I would do is what's called an owner's draw. Whatever was essentially left over after my operating expenses, that would be my profits. And that's what my motive was, running the business. I liked running a trucking business in my mid-20s. It made me feel good about it. Imagine a mid-20-year-old running a small business, has 9 employees, 4 trucks. I felt good about it, right? But my motive, my financial motive, was profits, and it was always profits, right? And anything less than that, I go out of business, right? It scales up to a corporation that at the end of the day, it comes down to profits, right? And so I'm as progressive as I am, I understand that there's an interplay between the capitalists, if you want to call it the old school term, it's a very derogatory name, but the capitalists, the big corporations, and the workers, right? It's an interplay. And Marx kind of pointed out long ago, right? And you can look at the Fred data, right? The share of firm profits go up and wages go down. And then the cycle reverses. It's like a predator-prey model. Wages will go up and profits will go down. And then, of course, you mix in the financial sector, and we've seen the growth of the financial sector over the last 50 years from the 70s. We've seen them take a share of that income of GDP away from households, and households have declined a bit, right? So it's part of the system. I'm not saying it's perfect. I don't like inequality. I think we should address maybe the financial sector as opposed to the capitalist productive sector, and that can include big corporations like Meta. As much as I'm not a big fan of Zuckerberg or these social media platforms, I myself, as a capitalist, I don't make government money. I fund myself either through my Patreon. I trade in the markets every morning. I do my work with modern macro technologies, right? So social media and promoting that has been good for me. So it's provided a productive resource for me. But I don't deny that there's inequality issues. What do you got here, Jamie? The problem with money accumulating at the top is eventually a lot of it will go to buying Congress critters to distort legislation on its way to going to capital investment. Well, no doubt. But that's always been the case in a lot of ways in every society, going back to Roman times, right? So that's always been the case. The question is can you have a free market system, capitalist system, and mix it in government with it, and to address the problems of inequality, right? Because I know a lot of talented people that don't have the financial resources to employ their talent in the free market, in our market system. And that's actually a drag on our economy. That's a problem because of inequality. So the question is there some silver bullet out there to stop money from trickling to the top in a capitalist system? Because nobody's willing to go to a communistic system. We're not, all of us can, I guess there might be some people watching that say, no, communism, put the means of production in the government's hands, and the government will be fair. But the problem is we can have the ideals that the government's fair, but are they efficient in that fairness? And that it's obviously demonstrated through time, in a democracy where you're changing the government every 4 to 5 years, and efficiency isn't really part of the game. So that's like one of the economic problems out there, right? Inequality, and how do you solve that in a capitalist free market system? It's a tough noodle to crack. And in my modeling, in my aggregate modeling, one of the first things we could address is the size and complexity of the financial sector. That's not to say we do away with the financial sector altogether, but we need to maybe rein it in. I have a lot of buddies in the financial sector. It's very controversial for me to say that, but when I model it, I see that it is problematic. So the financial sector is like oil in an engine. I'll get into some analogies here. You put the right amount of oil in the engine, your engine lasts longer. You put too much oil in your engine, you're actually putting too much pressure, and you'll blow seals. Okay, stupid analogy, but what I'm saying is we need the oil in the engine, but maybe we're dumping a little too much oil in it. My best analogy right now. Frank, what does Frank have here? Wealthy people buy assets first, then use them as collateral, therefore are always increasing the wealthy. If everyone did it, it might help inequality out a little. Yeah, I've always said, and this, again, it goes back to the inequality issue, right? So I don't think it's fair that the average, well, I'll use the US case, you even apply it to Canada or Europeans. I don't think the average, like I've traded some treasuries. I just don't see any alpha there. So I don't stay out of treasuries, but I don't think it should be so hard to access treasuries directly. And for the average, like you get them in your retirement packages, like they're packaged in. So you're a part of that treasury market, whether you know it or you don't know it. But I do believe there are barriers for the average person to enter the market safely. So maybe, I'm not saying go out and day trade, because day trade is trading is extremely dangerous, and I would call it gambling, but I would call it risk management. And so if you can't tolerate risk management, or if you've had a gambling problem or an addiction problem, don't be a day trader. I can guarantee you that. However, maybe you want to get into the swing trading, so more medium-term trading, and you want access to that's safe and you understand it, so you can get into assets. So maybe you can leverage, get some margin debt on your assets, right? And some good sizable assets. That's outside of the range of the average person, based on inequality. They can't afford it. They got to buy food. They got to pay their mortgage, right? They've got the interest rate costs, right, et cetera, et cetera. So they're excluded from that market. So yes, I would agree that I think the average person should have access to the financial markets more than they do now. And there are barriers that exist to that unless you're very technically crafty, right? You can navigate having different brokers, no financial derivatives. So if anybody's out there and you want to get into stocks, but they're not available with your broker, you can go and find derivatives like CFDs, so contract for differences, that represent the underlying stock, and you can go bet if they rise or fall and day trade them that way if you want. Obviously, your bid to ask spreads aren't as good, but there are ways to navigate and get in markets, but you got to be really technically savvy. And you're right, there's a exclusion to that in the market. What does Reagan have to say? Your economics doesn't seem to incorporate the concept of excess profits and rent. Do you believe in the idea of excess profits and rent? No. Bottom line is the economy is a dynamic system. You have entities that are the capitalists in the system, firms, and you have the workers in the system. Right. And if we want to participate in a free market capitalist system, there's going to be oscillation between the two. And you can look at the data and see it in the business cycle. If we exclude the financial sector, right, you have firms and you have workers. And you'll see an inverse relationship between their share of national income going back and forth, up and down. It's just mathematically the way it is, right? And the Goodwin growth cycle model is a good example of how that works. So you have capital, right? So much capital creates output. So much output, along with the productivity level, you need so much labor. Labor divided by the available civilian labor force, you get an employment ratio. If the employment ratio is high, wages tend to be bumped up because there's more demand for labors. If it's low, it goes down. So if as employment goes up, wages goes up, the cost for firms increases, the profits go down, they invest less, the capital stock grows slowly. That means there's a slower output. That means there's less employment, then wages start going down, and then the cycle repeats, profit goes up, firms start investing more, and you see the business cycle over and over and over again, right? That's just a part of the capitalist system. And obviously there are other permutations that happen in the system, but that is the fundamentals of it underneath. And that will always play out so long as we live in a free market capitalist system. I don't see that changing anytime soon. Like the rhetoric, right? There are people out there that would be more socialist, but that's only a subsection of the population versus the free market people, right? And with the US leading the way in that free market attitude, that's the way it's going to be for some time to come. Well, I'm just highlighting my own advertisement. Speaking of advertisement, what are you supposed to do? Hit that like button. Ooh, I'm going backwards. Like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and make sure you comment on the video. After that, I want to just shout out a few more of my pages. So I did about 50 before. Let's do another batch of Patreon subscribers. Hung Zhang Zhou Kim, pro supporter, thank you. Balaski Sky Bick, pro basic supporter, thank you. Rick O'Connor, pro supporter. Phil Carmody, intermediate supporter. Basic supporter. Gavin Wang, full sponsor supporter, thank you. Douglas Dewell, we saw Douglas today, full supporter, sponsor. Adavith Jamara, ooh, that's a tough one. Pro supporter, we'll leave it at that. Warner Butthart, intermediate supporter. Mario Fisher, basic supporter. Duran Philengender, intermediate supporter. Jay Kepler, intermediate supporter. Christine Herman, intermediate supporter. Victor Constantino, intermediate supporter. James Strutt, intermediate supporter. Dr. Jobo, basic supporter. David Troy Cochran, intermediate supporter. You may have seen him on the Steve Keen and Friends live stream. DT Cochran, good to see he's still around. Cheech 1121, which is an email address, basic supporter, Scott Griffin, basic supporter, John Torgan, intermediate supporter, Christopher Cleghorn, pro supporter, Peter Schenning, pro supporter, Fira, intermediate supporter, John Buckley, intermediate supporter, Dominic Tweed, intermediate supporter, Martin Bach, intermediate supporter, Janver Lindian, intermediate supporter, Grant Fitzer, intermediate supporter, Daniel Ortiz, pro supporter, James Chapman, basic supporter, Cindy W, intermediate supporter, Alfredo du Uran. Ooh, I might have butchered that one. Intermediate supporter, Matthew Gibbons. Basic supporter. And the list goes on. I'll do more each time. Oh, hey, we even see Douglas, the MMT macro trader, full sponsor supporter. Thanks, guys. We did some earlier. I'll try to shout you guys out more because you deserve that. I really, all those people made it possible for me to do independent research that I wouldn't have been able to do. I wouldn't have been able to get hooked up with modern macro technologies. Hey Ty, I just sent to the email. Thank you. I'll check it out after the stream. I appreciate that. Deerpoint, make sure you follow Deerpoint Macro if you are on X. Tons of insightful stuff. I love following his work. Great stuff. Appreciate everything you do, Deerpoint. Greetings from Poland. Poland. Greetings, and let me pronounce this name. Let me take my best stab at it. Sabak Tamalio. Maybe put some hyphens between your name so I know how to pronounce it right. So I get it right. I'm glad you're here. I'm live streaming. Basically on Tuesdays, I do a React video at 1 p.m. New York time. 1 p.m. New York time on Fridays. It is the Mr. Keynes and Dr. Keynes, the economic live stream. And then Sundays, we do the Relearning Economics live stream. So tune in. Make sure you hit the notification bell. That way you know when the videos are. It's a whole lot of fun. Yes, from Poland. Yes, yes, yes. That helps explain... Yeah, for monopolies and share. Well, I wouldn't call it enthusiasm. So here's the thing, and I explain this in every live stream. I don't care about ideology. I just care about how the system works so I can do proper forecasts, right? And so even if there's something I don't understand, I'm not there to judge it. I'm there to understand how it operates in the structure of the system. And what happens if you remove that from the overall system? What are the feedback effects, right? And so I understand the modern capitalist system, you need firms, and you need firms to have a profit motive, or why would people go into business? So it's not about an ideology thing. It's just a structural dynamic thing. What else do we got? Yes, from Poland. Poland. Fucking, we're like the UN here. Like the UN. I think we're kind of reaching the end of the live stream. We did the video. Clearly, we can all agree that Andrew Yang, that's his name, just spouted off a bunch of crap. And that I think at the end of the video, I think we can all come to the conclusion what matters is what a country can produce, not the number it can signal as debt from a currency issuing perspective. But we should acknowledge that private sector debt is a whole other beast. Dear Macro, I know you do not like tariffs. Want to ask that question next, but what do you think about the idea that capital flows, financial account, is what drives the deficit, not the other way around? Let me think about that. The idea that capital flows. So are we talking about international capital flows? So like, you know, the US imports a bunch. So the current account, they import a bunch. And then of course there's a bunch of USD. and those capital flows that come back and buy U.S. Financial assets. Just to clarify your question, I'm assuming that's what you are talking about. Dun, dun. Okay, I used to have a soundboard, and I used to be pow, 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 pow. And I wish I had the Jeopardy soundtrack. Dun, 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 dun. This is what happens. So I had 2 meetings before this. They both ran like an hour each, and then I decided to do a 4-hour live stream. I'm underneath these lights, and so I'm under like pro lighting here. I'm gonna show everybody. Let's see if it'd be too much work. Basically, I'm getting baked by 3 softbox lights going on. I've got this high temperature light down here. It's like just burning my back, right? And I'm starting to go crazy here. We've got a response by yes. Okay. So yes, exactly. But it's the bid for the financial assets that leads to the deficit on the current account. So we're talking about a causal loop, right? Does the current account cause the capital account, or as you're proposing that the capital account causes the current account? If the financial sector of the U.S. is fabricating more, engineering more financial products that need to be bought, and the demand isn't there domestically, you could say that would drive demand. And of course, doing that in that case will bring back funds back to the U.S. Of course, those financial products may not be actually creating real output for the economy, but it's driving up income demand in the domestic economy. That means the U.S. would then have to go to its current account and import more. In certain situations, I think in the U.S.'s case, I would agree. Like from a causal loop perspective, what's the psych? And this is what we were talking about. I don't know if you were here on what day was Sunday, where I was talking about there's a difference between an identity. So an identity in the textbook says, well, your capital account is equal to your current account, balances that out. But what Dear Macro is pointing out here, and this is what we were talking about, the investment is equal to savings. We're talking about causality. What is the causal loop, right? What impels that loop to happen? And for the US's sake, I would get on board with your thesis on that front. I think it's realistic in the US's sense, because it has a strong, vibrant financial sector to create these assets that are in demand globally. And of course, because that brings funds back to the US, that ultimately turns up as an additional income. That income's got to be spent on consumption. And obviously, the US does not produce everything it consumes. So then that drives more imports. That would sound reasonable to me. Frank, any thoughts on Dr. Keen's view on the trade deficit being bad? Personally, I don't see it as good, bad, just a value. All surpluses are equal to deficits. Well, it depends on the circumstance. I think Steve's bothered by imports are a benefit, exports are a cost, right? And if you look at it in static definitions, yeah, sure. Okay, that's great. But when you leave it at that, remember, you're dealing with policymakers and the general public. You're not just trying to speak to other academics, and circle jerk in the university hallways. You actually want to get your theories out to the general public and policymakers, but they're not economists. So what do they take with that? Oh, exports are bad. Let's not export anything, right? That's literally what they're going to take. Right. And unless you expand on it further. Right. So a number of situations, Australia loves its exports. It's not a cost for them. They export it. They get an income. Right. That income's used to consume things. Right. It's a benefit. Right. Exporting companies is not a cost for a Chinese company to export anything, right? You get into macroeconomic definitions, and then you lay out a slogan, and it can become problematic if you don't properly lay out that slogan. And also, Steve had problems with it wasn't temporal, right? These were essentially identities, right? You can simply say imports are a benefit. You're getting real junk from China, right? And you are losing real material when you export it, right? And just looking at that static definition, sure. But Steve doesn't like that. He uses like dynamics to explain that stuff. So it's a far more nuanced, and I'm on board with Steve in that case, and I get what he was trying to say. But every school, whether it's the Austrian school, the post-Keynesian school, the new Keynesian school, the neoclassicals, the MMT school, right? I would like to call them the neo-chartalists, etc., etc., the old classical view, the Marxists, they're all very rigid in their theoretical postulates, right? And so you get into that herd mentality where you don't like seeing that alternative opinion come out that goes against your theory. It causes controversy and et cetera, et cetera. That's why I try to stay out of the ideology, and I just want to see how the system works as is, right? I'm a student of economics, of all of it. I'm a student of the game, right? So I don't necessarily disagree with what MMT is saying as a slogan. I don't disagree with Steve's argument on the temporality of it. So there's non-ergodic systems and ergodic systems. Go Wikipedia. That was one of Steve's standpoints. So that's kind of where I stand on it, right? So in the US's case, you can't deny that you get stuff for the US dollar. And that's a benefit to you, right? And if you want a US doll for your child, great, you got the benefit of it, right? But you also can't deny that if you just use that as a blanket statement, right, that you guys didn't have a lot of toilet paper during the pandemic, right? And that's something I touched on earlier, right? So it's just broad. Economics is so broad that, just making a statement for a theoretical postulate can elicit responses from other people that have different theories. What else do we got? Dear point. You still haven't told me how to pronounce your name. Public sector debt is profit of the private sector. This is how it works. Yeah, I can agree with that. That's a MMT perspective. That's what I think everybody would agree that I was kind of pushing that. You missed the reaction part of the video, right? But essentially that's what I'm saying. But that aside, where's the income going? Right? So is it going to the ultra rich? Is it going to the middle rich? Is it going to the working class? Is it going to the poor? So the distributional aspect is important, right? And that's part of the whole policy. So it is true. That MMT part is true. Great. But there are other distributional parts. But I agree. I'm not going to argue with your statement. Dear point. Cannot be bought back. Oh, okay, so there was more. There was more up above somewhere. Cannot be bought back under Bob Rubin's strong dollar mantra leads to a lot of unemployment in the areas and decline in labor share and rise in cap. You know what, dear point? We should have you on a live stream one day. You ever show are you a faceless person, or do you ever show your face? It'd be great to have you on. Maybe you and Doug and me at the same time. What else we have? The Cantillon. I hear this so much. Yeah, okay, it's an effect. Trickle up economics. Oh shit. Any other questions before I go? Because I got work to do. I will be back. Oh, just want to let you guys know, Michael Hudson, any Michael Hudson fans, where you're going to have him on, hopefully within a month, on the Mr. Keynes and Dr. Keen economic live stream. So that's going to be a nice one to have him on. I've always wanted to have a good chat with him. Of course, him and Steve are good friends, so look out for that. No, I show my face. Or no, I don't show my face. Or you do show your face. Yes or no? No. That looks like no, Tyrone. I actually do show my face. That's how I'm reading it. And if that's the case, we'll arrange a little three-way live stream between me, you, and Doug. And look at the market perspective a little bit more. But anyways, getting to the top of the hour. I keep pressing button mashing here. You find me on X at Relearning Econ. I put a lot of stuff out there. I spent a whole year building up that account to have a good followership. So this year I'm working on my YouTube account to build it up. The other thing you got to do, you got to do this. You got to help me out. I show it. Okay, good. Then I will email you and we'll set up a date. And we'll do a three-way live stream. You got to hit the like button. I'm getting my hand signals right. Like, subscribe, hit the notification bell. Notification bell is really important, even more so than subscribing. That way you at least get a notification that I'm live streaming. If you can join in, great. If you can't, you can watch the recording later. And the comment thing, really good for the algorithm because it shows like you're engaged. So even if you got nothing to comment, say, hey, great stream, Ty, or something like that. It just helps get it out to a larger amount of people. Costs you nothing to do, and it helps me get to a wider audience. I'm not going to be monetizing this channel. Maybe I get to the point, like it's only 3,000 hours. And since I rebooted this channel, I'm up to 1,000 hours in watch time. So I'll get to that, but I'm not looking to make ad revenue. I just want to get to a sizable audience. That's all. So try to help out with that. But anyways, it's been fun. I like doing these every 3 or 4 days, every 2 days, actually. It's enjoyable. I like talking to you guys. I like debating the issues, right? I like being challenged. And that would be my parting message, right? Is allow yourself to be challenged, especially if you're in the field of economics. Allow your preconceived ideas to always be challenged, right? Because there's always gaps in everybody's thinking on, what you can learn. And, build up your own knowledge base. And of course, if your knowledge base is bigger, you can provide better value to maybe your employer, maybe you own a stake in a firm, and you can provide better value to your partners. Just provide better value. Maybe you're in the academic field, right? And you can provide if you're one of the names on an academic paper, you can provide better value in that paper, better research skills, all sorts of things. But anyways, until Friday, 1 o'clock p.m. New York time. We'll see you again. Bye-bye.
You are now relearning economics.